this was written. Oh, chat. Look at the name we're signed with today. Bum bum bum. He's back. K. Stalin. This is from 1913 today. And if you're wondering, we are reading from the cover that looks like this. Collected Works of Stalin, Volume 2 from Misgroup Books. Yeah, not to be confused with that totally different guy, K. Solon, or Koba Street. Those are totally different people, unrelated. All right, we're traveling back in time, 1913. We're reading this. We're reading this in the magazine Socialiste Democrat. Okay, written by not yet famous Georgian philosopher K. Stalin. And it's titled The Elections in St. Petersburg. A letter from St. Petersburg. This is going to be a good one, probably. We're going to talk about elections. I wonder if he's going to talk about whether we should vote for Graham Plattner or not. Unlike the elections of 1907, the elections in 1912 coincided with a revolutionary revival among the workers. In 1907, the tide of revolution was receding, and the counter-revolution triumphed. But in 1912, the first wave of a new revolution rose. This explains why the workers then went to the polls listlessly, and in some places even boycotted the elections. Boycotted them passively, of course, thereby showing that passive boycott is an undoubted symptom of listlessness and decline of strength. And it explains why now, in the atmosphere of a rising revolutionary tide, the workers went to the polls eagerly, casting aside flabby political difference. More than that, workers fought for the right to elections, strove for that right, and secured it by means of immense strikes against the interpretations, despite all cunning devices and obstacles employed by the police. It is undoubtedly a sign of the political torpor that has passed off, that the revolution has got past the dead point. True, the wave of the new revolution is not yet so strong as to enable us to raise the question, say, of a general political strike. But it is already strong to make it possible, in places, to break through the web of interpretations, with the object of animating the elections, organizing the forces of the proletariat, and politically enlightening the masses. Where did it get that quote from? G-string, that's clearly metal lyrics. Alright, part 1. The fight for elections. It will not be superfluous to note, superfluous, or however the people say that, to note that the initiative of the strike. I'm like Madeline, okay? I read things, I don't listen to things. The initiative in the strike campaign was taken by the representative of the Central Committee and the St. Petersburg Committee of our party. Late in the evening of October 4th, on the eve of the election of the electors, we learned that Yuzid Commission had interpreted the voters' delegates of the largest plants, Putilov's and others. An hour later, the Executive Commission of the St. Petersburg Committee met, together with the representatives of the Central Committee. And after drawing up a new list of electors, decided to call for a one-day protest strike. And the footnote here says J.V. Stalin was a Central Committee's representative during the election campaign in St. Petersburg. The Executive Commission of the St. Petersburg Commission was a small committee of members of the St. Petersburg Committee appointed to direct current work. That same night, the Social Democratic group at the Putilov Works met and accepted the decision of the St. Petersburg Committee. On the 5th, the Putilov strike began. The whole plant went on strike. On the 7th, Sunday, the Social Democratic group in Neva's shipbuilding yard met and associated itself with the decision of the St. Petersburg Committee. On the 8th, the entire shipyard went on strike. Their example was followed by other factories and works. Not only did the interpreted factories go on strike, but so also did those which had not been interpreted, PALs, and also those which, according to their regulations governing the elections, had no right to vote in the workers' curia. They struck in solidarity. Of revolutionary songs and demonstrations, there was no lack. Late at night on October 8th, it was learned that the Gubernia Elections Commission had annulled the election of electors, had countermanded the interpretations of the Used Commission, had restored the rights, quote unquote, of the Putilov workers, and had extended the elections to a large number of factories. The workers triumphed. They had won a victory. Of interest is the resolution adopted by the workers in the Neva shipbuilding yard and the Putilov works in declaring their strikes. Protesting against the violations of our electoral rights, we declare that only the overthrow of Tsarism and the winning of a democratic republic can ensure for the workers the right and real freedom to vote. A resolution moved by the liquidators to the effect that only universal suffrage in the election of the State Duma can guarantee the right to vote was rejected. These resolutions were first discussed by the Social Democratic groups in the respective plants. And when it was ascertained at the meetings of the groups of the Neva shipbuilding yard, for example, that the liquidators' resolution met with no sympathy, its supporters pledged themselves not to move at the meeting of the non-party masses, but to support the resolution adopted by the group. It must be said to their honor that they kept their word. On the other hand, the anti-liquidators displayed equal loyalty by securing the election of Gubakov as voters delegate, whom they could have, quote, dished as they had a majority at the shipyard behind him. It would not be amiss if at least a particle of the same sense of responsibility had been displayed by Luch, which is able to write so well about what did not happen at the various plants, but which hushed up the above mentioned resolution that was adopted at the Neva shipbuilding yard, and on top of that, garbled the resolution that was adopted at the Putilov works. That's another, I think this is another fake Stalin quote too. Ideas are more powerful than guns. True revolutionary wisdom. Pretty sure that's a fake one too. Thus, the workers fought for elections and secured elections. Let the St. Petersburg socialist revolutionaries, who at the Never shipbuilding yard so unsuccessfully opposed participation in the elections, learn a lesson from this. The workers fought for elections under the watchword of Democratic Republic. Let the liquidators of Luch, who make a fetish of partial reforms, learn a lesson from this. The Book of Quotations for Public Speakers, a political by U.S. Senator. It's it's from U.S. That quote is from a U.S. senator. That's see, I thought so. I'm gonna have to. I'm gonna see if maybe in the thing I can make it only quote Stalin books itself or something. Perhaps we'll see. All right, section 2. The deputy's mandate. Glory to Comrade Stalin. It's no, it's making me laugh. I like it. It tickles me. It tickles me. I'm gonna see if I can like somehow work in a line where it's like only look at Iskra books. Okay. All right, chapter part 2. The deputy's mandate. The interpretation strikes were not yet over when the assembly of voters delegates met. It was a foregone conclusion that the delegates would adopt the mandate, which had been drawn up by the St. Petersburg Committee and approved by the big plants in St. Petersburg, Putilov's and the Neva shipbuilding yard and pals. And indeed, the mandate was adopted by an overwhelming majority, only an insignificant group of liquidators abstaining. The latter's attempts to prevent a vote from being taken were met with cries of, "Don't obstruct." In their mandate to the Duma deputy, the voters' delegates referred to the tasks of 1905 and said that these tasks had remained unfulfilled, that the economic and political development of Russia makes their fulfillment inevitable. A struggle of the workers and the revolutionary peasants for the overthrow of Tsarism, in spite of the compromising policy of the cadet bourgeoisie. A struggle of which only the proletarian can be the leader. This, according to the mandate, could fulfill the tasks of 1905. See the mandate in Social Democrat, number 2829. As you see, this very far from the liberal liquidationist revision of the agrarian decisions of the Third Duma, or universal suffrage in the election of the State Duma. See the Liquidators platform. The Liquidators left, and if you don't know, I will reiterate again, the liquidators, they wanted to separate the party from the illegal elements of the party, like what Stalin was participating in, for example. The liquidators left out of the election platform, which they issued in September 1912, the main political demands of the minimum program of the RSDLP. Instead of the demand for a democratic republic, they inserted the demand for universal suffrage, quote, in the election of the State Duma and local government bodies. And instead of the demand for confiscation of the land of the landlords, they inserted a demand for, quote, a revision of the agrarian legislation of the Third Duma, unquote. Gross. So, cowards, in other words. The St. Petersburg workers remain loyal to the revolutionary traditions of our party. The slogans of revolutionary social democracy, and these slogans alone, received recognition at the Assembly of Voters' Delegates. At the Assembly, the question was decided by non party people. Of the 82 delegates, 41 were just Social Democrats and non party. And the fact that the mandate drawn up by the St. Petersburg Committee was adopted at even such an assembly shows that the slogans of the St. Petersburg Committee are deeply rooted in the heart and mind of the working class. What was the liquidators' attitude towards all this? Had they really believed in their own view and not been shaky in the matter of political honesty? They would have launched an open struggle against the mandate. They would have proposed their own mandate, or, if defeated, would have withdrawn their candidates from the list. Did they not put up their own list of candidates for electors in opposition to the list put up by the anti liquidators? Why, then, could they not also openly put forward their own views, their own mandate? And when the mandate of the anti liquidators was adopted, why did they not honestly and openly declare that, as opponents of this mandate, they could not stand for election as future champions of the mandate? That they would withdraw their candidates and leave the place open for the supporters of the mandate? After all, this is an elementary rule of political honesty. Or perhaps the liquidators avoided the question of the mandate because the question had not been sufficiently debated, and because at the assembly the question was settled by the votes of the non party people. But if that was the case, why did they not submit to the decision of the 26 Social Democratic voters' delegates, who met secretly several days before the Assembly of Voters' Delegates, and after a discussion adopted the platform of the anti liquidators by a majority of 16 to 9, with one abstaining, at which meeting the liquidators' leaders as well as their voters' delegates were present? By what lofty considerations were the liquidators guided when they trampled upon the mandate of the entire assembly and upon the will of the 26 Social Democratic voters' delegates? Obviously, there could be only one consideration: to spite the anti liquidators and smuggle through their own people somehow. But the whole point is that if the liquidators had dared to launch an open struggle, not one of their supporters would have been elected. Because it was obvious to everybody that the liquidators' proposal for a revision of the agrarian decisions of the Third Duma would find no support among the voters' delegates. There remained only one thing for them to do: to hide their flag, to pretend to be supporters of the mandate by declaring that, strictly speaking, we too are in favor of such and such a mandate, and thereby get their people elected somehow. And that is what they did. But by behaving in the way the liquidators admitted their defeat and registered themselves as political bankrupts. By compelling the enemy to furl his flag, i.e., compelling him to admit that his own flag is worthless, i.e., compelling him to admit the ideological superiority of his enemy, means precisely gaining a moral victory. And so, we have the following strange situation. The liquidators have a broad workers' party. The anti-liquidators, however, have only an ossified circle. And yet, the narrow circle vanquishes the broad party. What miracles happen in this world? I love how sassy Stalin is. Stalin and Lenin are both equally sassy. Sassy sisters. All right. 3. Unity as a mask and the elections of the Duma deputy. Ooh, this is gonna hit hard. Unity as a mask. Now, before we even read any of this, what does unity as a mask make you think of immediately, chat? When you hear those words, unity as a mask. Hmm, who says things like that? I was talking about this actually just yesterday. Maybe I was talking about it earlier today too. I can't quite remember. But the fact that, like I was saying, when Marxists, Leninists, or communists critique Zoran Mandani or some other social democrat or democratic socialist, sorry, for being a democratic socialist because we critique that political position, then it's we're splitting the left, right? We're splitting the left. We're not going with the unity. We see this all the time. Marxists say, anarchists say this as well. Like, well, you can't talk about actually existing socialist countries and protect them because then you would be splitting the left, you see. Right? It's a false unity. Now, I'm not sure that's what he's going to talk about, but that's what it sounds like we're about to talk about here. Unity as a mask and the elections of the Duma deputy, part 3. When bourgeois diplomats prepare for war, they begin to shout very loudly about peace and friendly relations. When a minister of foreign affairs begins to wax eloquently in favor of a peace conference, you can take it for granted that his government has already issued contracts for the construction of new dreadnoughts and monoplanes. Yep, there we go. Isn't it the party that has solidarity that ends up winning, whether left or right? I mean, the party that ends up gaining the solidarity is like by necessity on the left because the masses demand progressive change in the direction of realizing their independence. Whereas the reactionary minority for the very powerful but reactionary minority forces want to stop that human progress from developing, and they do so, of course, using false consciousness as a weapon, which is what leads people to deny, for example, scientific socialism, is having scientifically figured out the problems with capitalism and imperialism and the inevitability of revolution under such a system. If that makes sense. And I mean, this is great because this is exactly what I was talking about, right? Just think about the Graham Plattner, the AOC conversation we were just having earlier, chat. Right? People want us to support Graham Plattner or support AOC because they're going to be so progressive, right? Oh, we got to spend a lot. You Marxist Leninists are splitting the left if you don't spend time on your stream trying to rescue the reputation of Graham Plattner, right? I'm new here. That was a lot of word salad for me. I'm not trying to be disingenuous. Well, then what I would do is just hang out and maybe you'll learn something. I mean, here's the thing for me, like well, okay, actually I do want to ask you. What first of all, like what do you mean by left and right? Are you talking about like left and right in America, the Democrats versus the Republicans? Too old. Too old gets very excited. Don't mind too old. 2-0 won't bite. 2-0 won't bite. Yeah, the right is the ruling class. In the United States, yeah, I guess. Okay, well, I mean, you're saying you're new here, so I'm just wondering if you. So, I mean, so when you say right versus left, like you have a different understanding of right versus left than me. In our opinion here, we're Marxist Leninists here, and or at least that's the stream here. And in our opinion, you don't really have two parties in the United States, right? You have one party that styles itself as being two. It pretends to have two parties because that keeps the overall system itself, the military industrial media complex, the same. And that's the most important part. As Stalin is saying, we're reading Stalin here, and as he's saying back in 1913, he's saying that, this you can't actually have unity with even the most progressive of like these Democrats because even though they'll be calling for unity with the Marxist Leninists or what were called Social Democrats in 1913, um, you couldn't have unity with them because even though they're calling for unity, they're also in the behind the scenes or in the fucking Senate or in whatever house, whatever parliament, they're voting in favor of increasing the war machine, right? Spending more money on dreadnoughts and monoplanes, on fucking increasing the military budget, etc. Right? Like as much as whatever progressive candidate goes on and on about like wanting to like save this or that country or caring about this or that country or caring about bringing prices down, they all seem pretty much aligned on increasing military spending. So we're for a different way that has nothing to do with either of those two parties, and that's what we consider the actual left. I hope that makes sense. I hope that catches you up. The only one who went not war, yes peace is now in jail. Okay, when we get to the end of this chapter, I'm gonna have to listen to that song now, thanks to Complainy. This part right here. This part right here reminds me of the Chairman Africa clip we watched yesterday. Listen to Stalin's words right here. A diplomat's words must contradict his deeds. Otherwise, what sort of diplomat is he? Words are one thing, deeds something entirely different. Fine words are a mask to cover shady deeds. A sincere diplomat is like dry water or wood and iron. The same must be said about the liquidators and their mendacious clamor about unity. Recently, Comrade Plekhanov, who is in favor of unity in the party, wrote concerning the resolutions passed by the Liquidators Conference that, quote, they smell of diplomacy 10 versts away. And the same Comrade Plekhanov went on to describe their conference as a splitters conference. To put it more bluntly, the liquidators are deceiving the workers by their diplomatic clamor about unity. For while they talk about unity, they are engineering a split. Indeed, the liquidators are diplomats in the social democratic movement. With fine words about unity, they cover up their shady deeds in engineering a split. When a liquidator waxes eloquently in favor of unity, you can take it for granted that he has already trampled upon unity for the sake of a split. Liquidators Conference, we've got a footnote. This refers to the so called August Conference of the Liquidators, which was held in Vienna in August 1912 as a counterstroke to the Prague Conference of the Bolsheviks. Thank you for your streak. Streak revolutionarily acknowledged. The elections in St. Petersburg are direct proof of this. Unity, first of all, unity of action by the social democratically organized workers within the working class, which is yet unorganized, as yet unenlightened by the light of socialism. The social democratically organized workers raise questions at their meetings, discuss them, adopt decisions, and then, as a single whole, bring these decisions, which are absolutely binding upon the minority, before the non-party workers. Without this, there can be no unity of social democracy. Was there such a decision adopted in St. Petersburg? Yes, there was. It was the decision adopted by the 26 Social Democratic voters' delegates of both trends, who accepted the anti-liquidators platform. Why did not the liquidators submit to this decision? Why did they thwart the will of the majority of the Social Democratic voters' delegates? Why did they trample upon the unity of social democracy in St. Petersburg? Because the liquidators are diplomats in the social democratic movement, engineering a split under the mask of unity. Further, unity means unity of action of the proletariat in the face of the entire bourgeois world. The representatives of the proletariat adopt decisions and carry them out, acting as a single whole, with the condition being that the minority submits to the majority. Without this, there can be no unity of the proletariat. That is democratic centralism. Was there such a decision of the St. Petersburg proletariat? Yes, there was. It was the anti-liquidationist mandate adopted by the majority at the Assembly of the Voters' Delegates. Why did not the liquidators submit the mandate to the voters' delegates? Why did they thwart the will of the majority of the voters' delegates? Why did they trample upon the working class unity in St. Petersburg? Because liquidationist unity is a diplomatic phrase which covers up a policy of disrupting unity. When, after thwarting the will of the majority, nominating waverers, Sudakov, and making promises of a most diplomatic nature, the liquidators at last managed to secure the election of 3 of their electors. The question arose, what is to be done now? The only honest way out was to draw lots. The anti-liquidators proposed to the liquidators that lots should be drawn. But the liquidators rejected this proposal. After discussing the proposal with the Bolshevik X, the liquidator Y, we can, if necessary, give the names of the persons who discussed the matter on behalf of the respective sides, provided the necessary secrecy is maintained, consulted his like-minded friends, and then replied that drawing lots is unacceptable, as our electors are bound by the decision of our leading body. Let Messrs. The liquidators try to refute this statement of ours. And we have a footnote here. The Bolshevik X was N.G. Poltiev. The liquidator Y was probably E. Makyevsky, V.A. Gotowski. The St. Petersburg liquidators, A, B, and L mentioned, Lower down were V.M. Obrasnov and V. Levinsky, or V.O. Zetterbaum. Thwarting the will of the majority of the Social Democratic voters' delegates. Thwarting the will of the majority of the Assembly voters' delegates. Rejecting the proposal to draw lots. Refusing to put up a joint candidate for the Duma. All this in the interests of unity. You have a very queer idea of unity, messrs. Liquidators. Incidentally, the liquidator splitting policy is not new. They have been agitating against the Underground Party ever since 1908. The liquidators' outrageous conduct during the elections in St. Petersburg was a continuation of their old splitting policy. It is said that by his unity campaign, Trotsky introduced a new current into the liquidators' old affairs. But that is not true. In spite of Trotsky's heroic efforts and terrible threats, he, in the end, has proved to be merely a vociferous champion with fake muscles. For after 5 years of work, he has succeeded in uniting nobody but the liquidators. New noise, old actions. But let us return to the elections. The liquidators could have countered only on one thing when they rejected the proposal to draw lots. Namely, that the bourgeoisie, the cadets and the Octoberists, would prefer a liquidator. To thwart this neat little scheme, the St. Petersburg Committee had no alternative but to instruct all the electors to stand for election. For among the liquidators, there was a waverer, Sudakov, and in general, they had no solid group. In conformity with the instructions of the St. Petersburg Committee, all the anti-liquidationist electors stood for election. And the liquidators' neat little scheme was frustrated. Demoralization set in not among the anti-liquidators, but among the liquidationist electors, who rushed to stand for election in spite of the decision of their body. The surprising thing is not that Gutov agreed to Bendayev's nomination. Hanging over Gutov's head was the anti-liquidationist mandate that was adopted at his plant, but the fact that liquidator Petrov, followed by Gutov himself, stood for election after the election of Bediyev. There is only one deduction to be drawn from the foregoing. For the liquidators, unity is a mask to cover up their splitting policy, a means to get into the Duma in spite of the will expressed by the Social Democrats and the proletariat of St. Petersburg. Damn, Stalin's cooking here, chat. What do you think so far? Type Stalin. Type type Stalin, what is it? Stalin Heart or something? Yeah, Stalin Heart. Type Stalin Heart if you're loving this. Just like that, with small s. Small s in the beginning, capital H in the middle. There you go. Part 2. The City Curia. The Lena events, which, to refresh your memory, refers to the massacre of working strikers in Lena. The Lena events, and the revival among the workers generally, did not fail to affect the voters of the Second Curia. The democratic strata of the city population swung considerably to the left, That's the real left. 5 years ago, after the revolution was defeated, they buried the ideals of 1905. But now, after the mass strikes, the old ideals began to revive. There was a definite mood of dissatisfaction with the dual policy of the cadets, which the cadets could not help noticing. On the other hand, the Octoberists had failed to justify the hopes reposed in them by the big merchants and manufacturers. Vacancies occurred which, too, the cadets could not help noticing. And already in May of this year, the cadets resolved to play in two fronts. Not to fight, but to play. And that explains the dual character of the cadets' elections campaign in the two different Curie, which could not fail to astonish the voters. The Social Democrats' election campaign centered around their struggle with the cadets for influence on the Democratic strata, the hegemony of the counter-revolutionary bourgeoisie, or the hegemony of the revolutionary proletariat. Such was the formula of the Bolshevik, against which the liquidators had been fighting hopelessly for many years, and which they were now obliged to accept as an obvious and inevitable vital necessity. Victory in the Second Curia depended on the conduct of the democratic strata, who were democratic by virtue of their conditions, but were not yet conscious of their interests. Whom would these strata support? Social democracy or the cadets? There was also a third camp, the Rights and the Octoberists. But there was no grounds for talking seriously about the Black Hundred danger, because it was evident that the Rights could poll only a small number of votes. Although there was some talk about not frightening the bourgeoisie. See FD's article in Nevsky Golos. It only raised a smile, because it was obvious that the task that confronted social democracy was not only to frighten this bourgeoisie, but in the shape of its advocates, the cadets, to dislodge it from its positions. And Nevsky Golos, the voice of the Neva, was a legal weekly newspaper published by the Menshevik liquidators in St. Petersburg, May till August 1912. Ugh. You didn't want to catch yourself reading that rag. The hegemony of social democracy, or the hegemony of the cadets? That is how life itself presented the question. From that, it was clear that the utmost solidarity was needed in the ranks of social democracy through the campaign. It was precisely for that reason that the Election Commission of the St. Petersburg Committee concluded an agreement with the other commission, which consisted of Mensheviks and solitary liquidators. It was an agreement about persons, which allowed complete freedoms for conducting election propaganda, on the definite understanding that the list of candidates for the Duma must not include any person whose names or activities are associated with the struggle against party principle. Excerpt from Minutes of the Negotiations. As well, the well-known Social Democratic list for the Second Curia was arrived at merely as a result of the anti-liquidators' rejection of Ab and L, notorious St. Petersburg liquidators, whose name and activities are associated, etc. It will not be superfluous to point out here in order to characterize the advocates of unity that after Shekhedzi was nominated and Tiflis, they emphatically refused to withdraw his nomination in favor of a Social Democratic Provrotsky, ex-member of the Third Duma, and threatened to put up a parallel list and disrupt the campaign. However, The reservation concerning freedom of election propaganda was perhaps super, superfluous. Why does it keep using that word? Stop! For the course of the campaign, it clearly demonstrated that no campaign was possible in the fight against the cadets other than revolutionary social democratic, i.e., Bolshevik, campaign. Who does not remember the speeches delivered by the St. Petersburg speakers and social democratic candidates about the hegemony of the proletariat and about the old methods of struggle as against the new parliamentary methods, about the second movement and the uselessness of the slogan of the responsible cadet ministry? What became of the liquidators' lamentations about not splitting the opposition, about the cadet bourgeoisie swinging to the left, and about bringing pressure to bear on this bourgeoisie? Any of those sound familiar? I'm gonna just, like, the wording is slightly different, of course, right? But just listen to these slogans and ask yourself, when you're advocating for that different type of organization, right? Building the institutions, not worrying, like, as a Marxist Leninist yourself, not being worried about who's elected in this or that election, but rather, organizing to build build a party, I should say, that can build those institutions. How often do you hear things like this, that you must abide by the new parliamentary methods, right? The workers in the US, they're just not ready for that right now. You got to abide by AOC. You got to get behind Bernie, right? The second movement and the uselessness of the slogan of a responsible cadet ministry. What became the liquidators' lamentations about not splitting the opposition, about the cadet bourgeoisie swinging to the left and bringing pressure to bear on this bourgeoisie? And what about the anti-cadet agitation of the liquidators of the Luch, who nagged and frightened the cadets, sometimes even too much? Does not all this show that life itself uttered the truth, even out of the mouths of babes and sucklings? What became of the conscientious principle of Dan, Martov, and the other opponents of the cadetophobia? The liquidators, Broad Workers' Party, again sustained defeat in its struggle against the underground circle. Just think, the Broad Workers' Party, a captive in the hands of a tiny, tiny, tiny circle. What a miracle. Superfluous. Oh, I understand. It just gets tied up all in my lip parts, my mouth parts, my mouth lip parts. Part 3, summary. The first thing, partner app sent in. Let's go! Holy shit. Everybody, fingers crossed for Laney. We could get another partner on the tank tube team. Goddamn. Tank tube rising. Everybody, show your solidarity with Comrade Complainy. Follow her. Pray to Juche for her. Kneel down at your bed tonight and say, "Dear Juche, please see Complainy get partnered tonight." Highway. Wow, thank you for the 50 stream streak. That's much appreciated. And now this is going to be on YouTube, Complainy. This is now saved for posterity's sakes. And then when they don't get it, I can send this video in, and they'll see how disappointed such a large community would be in them rejecting obviously deserving comrade. All right. Part 3, summary. I'm going to summarize everything we've learned in this book
Books
now.
have stuff recorded down all over the years from people. And if we could find a book with
RT
similar problems,
is redeeming a comic quote.
on the book and make it, fuck.
I'm going to tell you what I'll do.
Take
I'm
what
going
you wrote down and make it ours.
to take your comic quote and I'm going to stick it at the end of this. So we'll finish reading this part here and then I'll read you a comic quote as well. I'm looking for a particular one here as well. Right here. There we go. Okay, perfect. Okay, summary. The first thing that is clear from this foregoing is that all talk about two camps. The camp of the supporters of the June the 3rd regime and the camp of its opponents is groundless. Actually, three, and not two camps appeared in the elections. The revolutionary camp, the Social Democrats, the counter-revolutionary camp, the rights, and the camp of the compromisers, who are undermining the revolution and bringing grist to the mill of counter-revolution, the cadets. Of a united opposition against the reaction, there was not a sign. Further, the election showed that the line of demarcation between the two extreme camps will become more distinct. That, as a consequence, the middle camp will melt away. Free the democratically minded to the advantage of social democracy, and itself gradually shift to the side of counter-revolution. I snap my fingers there because that part right there is key, and you can see this part happening right now, right? And what do we have a bunch of our friends on the left doing in response to watching that middle party, that middle camp in the US's situation? What do we see them doing to that middle camp right now? What are they doing? Are they letting it fall into obscurity and fighting to organize a party that can truly fill the promises that it so like criminally wields against the proletariat, you know? Or are many of our friends on the left who, again, like friends on the left, it's not, they're, but what are they doing? Many of them are trying to rescue that Democratic Party, right? Well, the reason why the Democrats are going further and further right is exactly what he's talking about here. The reason why they can't ever go further left is because if they go too far left, then they're doing the thing that they're exactly trying to fight against. Right? So that's why there's a limitation to that idea of bringing in these insurgent candidates into the Democratic Party that will then be able to bring you new democratic gains or make conditions better again. They just simply won't be able to do that because of the falling rate of profit, because overseas more and more territories are gaining their liberation in Africa and, all around the world fighting against the US empire. Because of that, there is less super profits from imperialism to give people the high level of income that they've had for a long time. Or the meager social wage benefits that exist in the US, etc., all of that is like they're trying to figure out, of course, how to roll that back. And they're trying all the time, but it's getting more and more urgent all the time. Capitalism already has the tendency in it for the falling rate of profit for the bourgeoisie. And then it's like a force multiplier, the fact that you have all of these people fighting for liberation, which weakens imperialism, weakens the ability to extract super profits. And as a result of that, that middle ground where, where the Democrats really are trying to be situated in that, melts away. It becomes more and more irrelevant because it shows itself to be completely useless to even develop in the reactionary direction after a time, which is essentially the position we're finding ourselves in now. And that's why it's struggling to go righter and righter, to go further and further to the right. What the fuck was that? It's the same. It's the same troll every day. The same troll every single day.
Yeah. See
Yeah,
ya.
the trajectory has always been set. The velocity is increasing. Exactly, Dave. And these middle parties, like like labor, they either become exactly like they either become exactly like the they either become exactly like the right wing party, like the Republicans, or they fall apart. I'm gonna allow this, but I generally am trying to avoid that word, the D word you use here. But I'm gonna allow it because you didn't know and you're new here. And I want you to people to see your question here. This might be a silly question. Why can't we just say anti-capitalist versus pro-capitalist? I mean, what do you mean? We can say that. We could say that. Absolutely, we can say that. Why not? I don't see why we couldn't say that. I'll say it right now. We're anti-capitalist, and a lot of these friends of ours on the left are unknowingly pro-capitalist, but they want to be anti-capitalist. Like this, but we're also for something, which is why we say communism. We're for we're for a society that is no longer so politically unstable that revolution is an inevitability. We want society to be in a constantly revolutionizing state by putting power in the hands of the people themselves. Whereas right now, power is in the hands of the parasites who act on behalf of capital, as if capital had become anthropomorphized and is able to trample all of us. That's what the bourgeoisie is. And that's why I am gonna I'm gonna read you this part again because I do think this is important. And again, we see this situation right now, which is why you see two trends amongst the reformists. You see this scrambling of trying to rescue the Democratic Party and rescue American democracy, quote unquote, by getting these insurgent and progressive candidates in through the DSA or other mechanisms, right? and then you have and then you have like the other trend of people who are becoming more and more critical of that strategy and looking for another way to organize, right? The other trend within the party, it's within the Democratic Party itself, of course, and I would say the main and clearly more powerful and more likely to happen trend is the trend that it goes towards the Republicans more and more. It becomes a mirror of them, or it just falls into being irrelevant completely. Some people think there's that third option of it going to the left, but in reality, there's not. There's only those two options. It either becomes completely irrelevant or it becomes a mirror of the Republicans even more readily. It becomes indiscernible. And that's why he says, further, the elections show that the line of demarcation between the two extreme camps will become more distinct. That as a consequence, the middle camp will melt away. Free the democratically minded to the advantage of social democracy, and itself gradually shift to the side of the counter revolution. And that's why, despite all of their cries about us splitting the left, or us being wreckers or whatever they say, because we won't spend time doing PR for Mamdani and instead we're being too critical, or doing PR for AOC and instead because we're being too critical and not looking at how good her voting record is compared to everybody else, right? While they're doing that, we're trying to build that alternative. Because if we don't, who else will? If we're spending our time, if we're spending our time doing that PR for them like they are, then we're just being social democrats. The modern version of social democrats, not the Marxist version before the split here. Right? So we're just being just like social democrats if we were to just adopt their strategies and tactics. What else would you be then, right? That's why we remain critical of that strategy. We remain critical of those tactics. Does that mean that we won't work with a social democrat on a particular issue, or talk with them in broad coalitions, or bring them into our media and have discussions with them? Absolutely not. It doesn't mean that whatsoever. It just means that, we are in an actual struggle that is like a matter of life and death, a matter of socialism or barbarism. And so in that situation, it's like we have to be able to have those hard conversations. Yes, we can organize together, but you have to accept that I'm going to say, I don't think that your strategy is correct, and therefore I am going to try a different strategy of organizing a party that can put its own candidate up into the election. If I can get them there, right? And use that not to win the election, but use that to grow our movement. And the movement itself, the party itself, is the primary driving factor of our movement. The building of the institutions that serve the people that they so desperately need, which also helps to win them over to our side. Yeah, and that's the thing. For us, it has been proven not to be correct through history. We're reading about it right now. The experience has been there, right? So that's why. I mean, that's why I know I'm harping on this topic lately a lot, but it's especially reading this, it's really like hitting me how often that is, right? Another silly question. Can't we just look at historical patterns and see what worked and what hasn't? Yes. And that's exactly what Marxism Leninism is all about. That's exactly why we're reading this and pointing out, look, this is the same situation we're in now. What works is the Marxist Leninist program of building separate institutions that can become the foundations of something new. Hence, talk about reforms from above, about upheavals being impossible, and about Russia's organic development under the aegis of a constitution becomes utterly baseless. The course of events is inevitably leading to a new revolution. And despite the assurances of the Larins and the liquidators, we shall live through another 1905. And right there again, it's not a matter of that that's the thing again for us, right? We're organizing this because we see the masses aren't gaining, the masses are going in that direction. They can't go in any other direction. Revolution under capitalism is inevitable. Are we going to organize the institutions and get the connections and get the resources together necessary for that? Or not? And what happens when the left is not organized enough to do that? Well, we know. Right? We've seen it many times. Lastly, the elections show that the proletariat, and the proletariat alone, is destined to lead the impending revolution. Step by step, rallying around itself all the honest and democratic in Russia. all those who were thirsting for the liberation of their country from bondage. To become convinced of that, it is sufficient to note the course of the elections in the Workers' Curia, to note the sympathies of the St. Petersburg workers that were so clearly expressed in the mandate of the voters' delegates, and to note their revolutionary struggle for elections. All this gives us ground for asserting that the elections in St. Petersburg have fully confirmed the correctness of the slogans of the revolutionary social democracy. Revolutionary social democracy is virile and strong. Such is the first deduction to be drawn. The liquidators are politically bankrupt. Such is the second deduction. Social Democrat number 30. January 12th, or 25th in the new calendar, 1913. Reprinted from the newspaper, signed K. Stalin. There you go. Next week, we read On the Road to Nationalism. A letter from the Caucasus. And here is your quote to go with that read. Hey, Bri. Good to see ya. The fact also that the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie is a secret, concealed, backstage dictatorship, which needs a plausible camouflage with which to deceive the masses. The dictatorship of the proletariat and revolutionary peasantry, on the other hand, is an open dictatorship, a dictatorship of the masses, which has no need to resort to deception in home affairs or to secret diplomacy in foreign affairs. But it follows that our bourgeois dictators will strive to solve the most vital problems of the country. The question of war and peace, for example, behind the back of the masses, without the masses, by means of a conspiracy against the masses.